In Joseph Losey's utterly brilliant and mesmerising film, the 1963 film The Servant, there's a sinister transformation that unfolds, and the supposed servant, Hugo Barrett, played with unnerving precision by Dirk Bogarde, slowly usurps his master's power, manipulating, controlling, ultimately infantilizing James Fox, Tony. And Tony is reduced to a pitiful wreck, utterly dependent on the very man that he employed, and the roles of master and servant are reversed, but in a way that leaves both figures degraded, bound together by their own moral collapse. What begins as a classic class commentary quickly descends into a nightmarish allegory of parasitism and manipulation. Lowes's film is eerily prescient in describing what has happened not only to the Labour Party but across Westminster and Whitehall and beyond, into local councils and into organisations like Aviva or Avanti or your local telephone, your telephone provider. Once upon a time, politicians were public servants, civil servants were bureaucratic facilitators, and the electorate, the sovereign people, were the masters. But like Barrett in The Servant, those who were hired to serve the public have, over time, seized the reins, manipulated, diminished, and ultimately steered, or they are steering or actually sneering at those who they're supposed to represent. We, the people, have become the stooges in this reenactment of Lowes's film. Andrew Gwynne's WhatsApp exchange, in which he suggests, in which he makes his contemptuous reply to a 72-year-old constituent in Manchester, whether he did or not, F your bins, I'm re-elected and without your vote, screw you. P.S. Hopefully you'll have croaked it by the all-outs, is shocking, but only in its naked honesty. This is not just Labour's problem, it's the culmination of a cross-party, cross-institutional rot in which those who supposedly work for us have come to believe they're in charge. They disdain the public. That disdain is palpable, and it's not confined to one party or one MP or one single location. Yes, it's particularly evident across Westminster. Yes, it's particularly evident in the Labour Party because Labour is in power. But no, it's not exclusive. The Spectator, therefore, which has done an article today, is wrong to see this as solely a Labour problem. The attitude Gwynn exhibits is part of a much broader shift in the political class's view of the electorate. Take Gordon Brown's infamous bigot comment in 2010, where a pensioner who raised concerns about immigration was privately dismissed as a reactionary nuisance, or Emily Thornberry's sneering dismissal of a Rochester resident flying the St. George's flag. There is a deep, systemic condescension towards the very people that politicians claim to represent. How can they represent us if they treat us with such sneering disdain? After the Brexit referendum, this contempt has become explicit, and perhaps it's very useful to have Andrew Gwynn's statement in print, because it demonstrates absolutely what we've been thinking and what we've been experiencing. Working class Leave voters were branded gammons and thick. Labour, a party founded to represent the working class, found itself viewing them with disdain. It's a far cry from Keir Hardie's Labour, which saw itself as the protector of the common worker. Now the party's priorities appear more aligned with ideological purity, bureaucratic control, and moral superiority than with the interests of its traditional base. But Labour is not alone in this degeneration. The civil service, long the quiet executor, or indeed the executor of government policy, has become an active player in its own right, obstructing, delaying, and even sabotaging the will of elected officials when it doesn't align with their own values. Yes, Minister has become a reality. Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, however controversial, repeatedly clashed with officials who seemed to believe that they had the final say on policy. It's not difficult to see why voters feel as though democracy itself is being hijacked by unelected bureaucrats who see their role as ruling rather than serving. This morning, while I was teaching, I had a phone call again from the passport office, again, presumably to apologise or explain why they were so tardy in doing a job that should have only taken, by their estimate, 40 days. And it took about 60. And it was only efficacious because of the intercession of my local MP. And the final letter was delivered without explanation or apology, and I asked for an explanation. I asked for that apology. And yesterday I had a telephone call from a man called Phil. Today I had a telephone call from a person called Natalie, or Natalia. Natalia was slightly nicer, a little bit more polite, but nevertheless, I asked her to call back in 20 minutes because I was teaching, literally, and she said she couldn't do that. I could telephone the passport advice line, the passport office, run by, oh gosh, what's it called? Transmitter or whatever the nonsense is. A trans-performance. Is that it? I can't remember. And a teleperformance. And I asked her if she was part of teleperformance or if she was really part of the Home Office and part of the Passport Office, and she said she was not part of teleperformance. In fact, she was quite insistent on that. But she wasn't prepared to give me a telephone number to call her back, and she wasn't prepared to call me back. She expected me to go through the same rigmarole again of filing a complaint and waiting for them to call me at their convenience. So I have actually filed another complaint, and I've given them a list of the times when I'm not available. So let's see if they do something there. But I find it extraordinary that this haughty, officious, contemptuous tone is adopted by an office which is supposedly apologising. And it just doesn't seem to be able to get down on its knees and recognise its error and frankly recognise its position. And I find that extraordinary. It isn't serving. It isn't serving. It is commanding, and it is doing so. It is doing so with an unhealthy disdain for the public. And yesterday the person wanted to know who they were talking to, and were quite contemptuous about that. And today the person actually addressed me as Tim, which I thought was a little forward. So she knew who she was talking to. And I think, returning to the servant, we see in Barrett's Machiavellian control over Tony an eerie reflection of the modern political class's treatment of the electorate. And Tony, and I use the term political class in its broadest sense to also include that level of civil service, middle management, the people who are controlling the NHS trusts, the people who have decided that if you want to bring a case against an NHS trust, you have 2.5 years in which to do it. And all this sort of nonsense which limits the ordinary public's right to act or access to information, because you're not given this information. The information seeps through. It's a slow drip. And unless you are part of the system, you don't know how to take on the system. And if you are part of the system and you blow a whistle, then you are crucified. And I know that from talking to people who have been whistleblowers in the NHS. Their careers, their livelihood has been destroyed. And in some cases, they've actually left the country. And I'm not surprised. So Tony, in the servant, believes that he's in charge. He's slowly stripped of his autonomy. He's slowly stripped of his agency. Not unlike being in a reality TV show. The trappings of power remain, but he's no longer the master of his own home. Similarly, politicians maintain the illusion of public service while increasingly doing as they please, insulated from the consequences of their contempt. Lowes' film and Harold Pinter's biting screenplay are ultimately about the corruption of power and the destruction of trust between those who serve and those who are served. And 60 years later, we see this at play throughout our society. In the end, both Barrett and Tony are left in a grotesque mutual degradation. That is precisely where we are now politically. Politicians have come to believe that they are beyond accountability, while voters, where we are now politically, where we are now, are trapped in cycles of political disappointment, growing ever more cynical, disillusioned, and angry. And Gwynne's remarks have been unusually explicit, but they're far from unique. This is not simply a Labour issue. It's not even just a Westminster issue. It's a problem with the system that has infected the entire political and bureaucratic apparatus, and the servants have taken over the house, and they are laughing at the masters. The question is, what can we do about it?